Wes du har min freon and welcome to yet another video. This is a video review of the film Tolkien from 2019. And let me tell you, my dear friends, I have been postponing watching this film for as long as I was able to. But finally, my dear friends and viewers have pushed me to watch this film so I can review it on this particular channel for all of you to hear. Now, why did I postpone it for so long? Well, simply, I was afraid. I knew that the entertainment industry is not in the best shape, and it hasn't been for the last couple of years, at least 5 to 10 years. And this film being made in 2019, I was very much afraid that they would butcher it, that they would make Tolkien into something or somebody that he never was, and that they would altogether focus on the socio-political agendas of today's world, and that they would somehow try to cram it into the life of one of the greatest men in the history of human race. Of course, no, they didn't. The film was absolutely fantastic. Now, for those of you who are afraid of any spoilers, yes, this review will contain spoilers, but come on, this is a biographical film. It is a historical film. It is as if you were afraid that I would spoil the War of the Roses for you, or if I was making a review video about Julius Caesar, and I would spoil that he was betrayed by Brutus. But that is absolutely preposterous. But of course, for those of you who still care for some reason, yes, I'm going to spoil things. So the film is focusing, of course, on the earliest years of John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, his early childhood, when he was born in Bloemfontein in South Africa, but then he moved. It doesn't cover everything that I say, but for those of you who've read the Humphrey Carpenter's biography of Tolkien, you know. And they moved to England with his brother and his mother to visit their family because his father was working in South Africa. But while they were visiting, his father died. So they had to stay in England without any money. So they lived for a couple of years in the country, in the English country, which of course inspired Tolkien when he was creating The Shire and The Hobbit. But then when the money stopped and they ran out of it, they had to move to Birmingham, which of course I think most of you will know that is absolutely different from the English countryside. It is an industrial city. And there already I can see why, at the beginning of the video, why I have been sympathizing with Tolkien my entire life, and he has been an inspiration to me in many ways, not just one. I know the clear difference, living where I live, between this beautiful countryside and a brutally industrialized city, and the shock that it did to a little kid, has to be tremendously awful. And of course, the film focuses on the main aspects of Tolkien's life. He was, after all, first and foremost, a philologist. He was in love with languages. It was his greatest passion, learning languages and making up his artificial languages. It started with his mother, who taught him Latin, and who unfortunately died when she was herself very young, and when Tolkien was young. We now know that she died on diabetes. At the time, of course, people didn't know much about it, and she did not get the proper treatment. So he was left an orphan, and was raised by various people here and there. He was supervised by Father Francis, I think his name was, and that's where his mother and the priest, they were taking care of Tolkien. That's where Tolkien was influenced hugely by the Catholicism, and stayed a devout Catholic until the day he died. And it of course focuses on him fighting in the First World War, and there losing all his friends that he had cherished for the entirety of his childhood, and seeing the horrible horrors and terrors of the Great War, the war to end all wars, as they called it, must have left a tremendous, awful impact that would last forever. And all this was depicted in the film. What I appreciated, or what I appreciate about it, was the inclusion of those little snippets made by special effects, the CGI, when they included like visions or almost mirages of things to come, of things that would be born in Tolkien's mind when he was fighting in the trenches of the First World War. And he saw the battlefield and all the horrors and dead people and, his dead friends. It is as if a Dark Lord was walking around the battlefield, and his minions, and the Black Riders, the Nazgûl and the Orcs, and there was a dragon. And not only that, but his mother, and that was beautifully portrayed in the film. She had to teach them, him and his brother, because they didn't have money to go to school, to boarding school, as they did in England back then. She read them snippets from the legend of Sigurd and Fafnir, the old Norse legend of a hero slaying a dragon. And there, of course, this was a speaking dragon, a witty dragon. Well, actually, it was somebody else cursed into a dragon, or shaped into a dragon, but that's not relevant here. But there is, of course, a clear inspiration for him to make Smaug the dragon. And not only that, he was, from the very beginning, in the trenches of the First World War, he was already writing his stories, writing the Book of Lost Tales, which would then evolve gradually into the Silmarillion, and so on and so forth. It also beautifully depicted his relationship, lifelong love for Edith Bratt, or later Edith Tolkien. And, of course, last but not least, I would have to say first and foremost, his stay at Oxford, where he, of course, went, but then he was nearly expelled, and then he had to go to the war, and then he resumed his studies and finally became a professor. And there wasn't really much focused on in the film, but he became a professor of Old English, and he met C.S. Lewis, and he started visiting the Burden Baby regularly, on a regular basis, and that wasn't in the film anymore. And they were reading to each other their own creations, him, C.S. Lewis, and other academics and friends, the Inklings. And all of this, and especially two particular aspects of that film had very, very deep personal impact for me, because I remembered why I am who I am and who inspired me to do what I did in the past, and that is to study historical linguistics and English literature. I remember also sitting, at my table over hundreds of pages of poetry, Old English poetry, and analyzing each and every single verse or half line, or a hemistich, coming up with analyses and conclusions, and then writing my own poetry and translating text from Old English to modern English, writing my theses on runes used in Tolkien's works, and then on the use of the alliterative poetry in Tolkien's works, and the passion I had for studying languages and literature, and for being a part of the academia, which of course was very different back then at the time, because people were worthy, a full stop. And if you want to know what I mean by it, it was that people's thinking was very different. They still cherished and treasured the good old values, the good behavior, good manners, honesty, truth. Of course, there were bastards at the time as well as there are nowadays, but you have to admit that people today are exceptionally evil, exceptionally vile, exceptionally egotistical and self-centered nitwits. And because the civilization is so developed today in the developed countries, and we have everything, people have become spoiled. There are social media, and everybody thinks that they understand everything, and everybody thinks that they can have their own opinion on everything, and that they can shout it out into the world, and everybody must respect their opinion without a trace of any experience in life. But if you compare yourselves, or those people that I'm talking about, to somebody like Tolkien, who was a genius and had a very tough life, who had to fight in a war, in a genuine, true, real war, and saw his friends die, and was studying and inventing higher things like languages and literature, dead languages, historical languages, his entire life, who was able to stay true to his beliefs, to his faith, to his passion, and become somebody better, most certainly. And nowadays, not only academia, but the entire world and all the spheres of society and culture, of course, and civilization are riddled with plebs, with what some people call garbage people. And those garbage people think that they can express their own opinions on various things. Well, let us now for a brief second talk about the upcoming Rings of Power, which is despicable and abhorrent even more now, after I've seen the Tolkien film. How can anyone possibly think that they can connect this pile of donkey manure with Tolkien? This absolute desecration. And as I said in one of my previous videos, it is not about breaking the law anymore. It is not about not staying faithful to the source material, because there is no law to begin with in the Rings of Power. There is no source material to begin with in the Rings of Power TV show by Amazon, because they only and merely took some names and now are making a mess, a goulash out of it. So it's got nothing to do with the professor. What also, and that might be the last snippet I'm going to talk about, what made me very and truly happy and made me, well, two things, smile, is, if you remember, near the very ending of the film, there was the first scene when Tolkien's finally the professor, and he was riding a bike, and he always was riding a bike from his home to Oxford when he lived in Oxford. And somebody shouted, "Hello, Professor Tolkien." And do you know what he said? It was very hard to catch it, especially if you don't know the language. But he responded in Old English, and he really genuinely said "Where's Hal?" He said "my own greeting," or it's not my own greeting, but it is an Old English, Anglo-Saxon greeting, which was very common at the time, not in the 20th century, but in the Anglo-Saxon period. And of course, if you read The Lord of the Rings, it's also the greeting of the Rohirrim. So once again, there's a clear inspiration, and the Rohirrim are really basically old Anglo-Saxons transformed into his secondary world fantasy. And finally, the ending of the film. Now, for those of you who don't want to know how the film ends, cover your ears. But I don't know why you could really think that this film can be spoiled for you. It ends with Tolkien writing the first line in The Hobbit. "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." And that made me feel very emotional, indeed. And I remembered why I hate the modern world. Because the modern world is very different from back then. There was a true war in the world. And very soon after that, there was another true war in the world. But today's world is much worse. Exactly because we live in a relative peace. And we have everything, and people back then didn't have so many things that we have nowadays. And still people are more vile and more idiotic and bigger bastards than they were in the past. Friendship is being forgotten as a concept itself. Just simple friendship, having friends or a friend. Loyalty, honor, the love of the finer things like art and literature, actually reading and enjoying something. Today it's all about deconstruction, socio-political agendas and scandals and dramas on the internet. So in one way, the movie made me feel quite sad, because I realized that those days, and also the days of when I thought my life would reflect very much, Tolkien's life, but it is not possible these days. I was shadow banned at the university because of socio-political agendas of 2022, because you can only study humanities and excel at humanities and get a PhD in humanities if you are very, very, very far left-leaning, and ideally if you are a woke female, and otherwise if you are a traditional conservative, old school thinking white guy, not homosexual, heterosexual, no, you are the devil. You cannot do anything. But at the same time, it made me feel better, because I was reassured in the fact that myself, and as concerning modern people and the adaptation, supposed adaptation, The Rings of Power, this cannot and will not make me angry or sad. There will be a lot of people who will enjoy the adaptation, but it's merely a plebs. And you can't expect, and I will never ever ask people to dislike The Rings of Power and to fight for Tolkien and appreciate just his books and nothing else. I was just reminded of why it isn't possible. Because we are not all equal. Most people in the world are not able to grasp the intricacies of the books that Tolkien wrote. They are not able to understand the circumstances under which he wrote it. They are not able to understand the higher things, just because they don't have, enough wit. They're not intelligent enough. But it is absolutely okay for you not to be intelligent enough, because it's the way of the world. Most people are dumb. Most people are stupid. Most people are sheep. But that's how it always been. The tragedy of today's world is that everybody is led to think that we are all equal. And everybody is led to think that they can achieve anything they want. That even the dumbest idiot in the world can become the president. Now, that might have been a little bit bad comparison, because most politicians are idiots, but you know what I mean. So yeah, a Tolkien film from 2019 was extraordinarily good. I enjoyed it. They honored Professor Tolkien, his early years, what he did, how he lived his life, as well as Edith Tolkien, his lifelong love, who's buried with him at Oxford, and of course their names are engraved on the tombstone, Beren and Luthien underneath that. It honored his love for languages, for legends and myths, also for rugby football. And I will rewatch it very soon. So let me know in the comments down below what you think about this film, and that'll be all. Thank you very much for watching, and Namarie.